Good morning and welcome to the Point. This week, the last big unknown in the 2020 presidential sweepstakes, at least as it relates to the tickets, was unveiled when presumptive Democratic nominee Joe Biden announced California Senator Kamala Harris would be his running mate. Biden wasted no time going after President Trump for going after his running mate.
You all knew it was coming. You could have set your watches to it. Donald Trump has already started his attacks, calling Kamala, quote, nasty, whining about how she is, quote, mean to his appointees. It's no surprise, because whining is what Donald Trump does best, better than any president in American history. Is anyone surprised Donald Trump has a problem with a strong woman or strong women across the board? We know that more is to come. So let's be clear. If you're a working person, worried about whether or not you'll have a job to go to, whether or not you'll be able to pay your mortgage, pay your rent, worried about the poison in the air you breathe, the water you drink, worried about your civil rights, even your basic right to dignity, which is under attack with this administration. Kamala Harris has had your back, and now we have to have her back. She's going to stand with me in this campaign, and all of us are going to stand up for her.
I devoted my life to making real the words carved in the United States Supreme Court, equal justice under law. And 30 years ago, I stood before a judge for the first time, breathed deep, and uttered the phrase that would truly guide my career and the rest of my career. Kamala Harris for the people. The people. That's who I represented as district attorney, fighting on behalf of victims who needed help. The people. That's who I fought for as California's attorney general.
Predictably, the campaigns are intensifying now with less than 80 days before Election Day. President Trump's son, Eric, was on the talk circuit weighing in on the choice of Senator Harris, the state of the campaign, and with us at least, the state of Michigan. Let's start by talking about former Vice President Joe Biden's selection as Kamala Harris as his running mate. Does that change the dynamics of this race from the Trump campaign perspective? And if so, how?
Well, not at all, Rick. In fact, it's kind of, I think a blessing in disguise in a certain way, right? She didn't do well in Michigan. You know that, well, I'm sure you covered the primary incredibly thoroughly. She got less than 2% of the overall vote in the primaries. And I don't know why people think that's going to, relate to massive today. I mean, what unicorn has come along and, magically, caused her to be an enthusiastic candidate when she had no enthusiasm during, the primary. So that's first and foremost. Second of all, she's unrelatable. Just being from San Francisco, and embodying so much of what that city has become, she's unrelatable to so many Americans, right? If you look at San Francisco, it's drug riddled. You can't walk 3 feet without walking over hypodermic needles. You have people defecating in the streets. You've got homelessness that's rampant. You've got crime that's rampant. You have taxes that are so crushing that people can't even afford to live there anymore and are moving out left and right. And, she embodies so much of that. And then you look at her plans. I mean, during the primaries, you remember this, and I'm sure you covered it, but, she wanted to get rid of 180 million private healthcare plans. She goes, no, we want socialized medicine. We want government-run medicine. So we want to get rid of all private health insurance. So, to everybody in Michigan, if you like your private health insurance, if you like your private plan, if you like the doctor you have, do me a favor. Remember what she said, because she's literally to the left of Bernie Sanders. This is not the Democratic Party of JFK. This is not the Democratic Party of Bill Clinton. This is a radical party that wants no border wall, no border security, Medicare for all for every illegal immigrant, healthcare for all for every illegal immigrant. Government-run medicine, $90 trillion spent on the Green New Deal. I could go on and on and on. And, Rick, one more thing. It wasn't that long ago that she was coming out saying, I believe the women that accused Joe Biden of sexual assault. I believe those women, and I believe that those women need to be heard. And then about a week before that, she was saying, I do believe Joe Biden was a racist. He believed in busing. He believed in other policies, and he has to answer for those policies. Did Biden forget that she said this? I mean, it'd be the last candidate in the world I would think he would have picked. It's actually it's actually rather baffling to us, both as a family and a campaign, that he could pick somebody who, and maybe he doesn't remember, truthfully, he probably doesn't, but that hit him as hard as she did, and frankly, is as radical as she is.
Let's talk a little bit about the shape of the campaign. 4 years ago, massive rallies, traveling state to state, doing 2 or 3 of those a day. It's a different kind of campaign, but I know that you've got some of the campaign that's out on the road, including a bus tour that's going on with some women for Trump. Tell me how this campaign is functioning differently than it was 4 years ago.
Yeah, I think after kind of the virus sent over from China, I think campaigns are different, and we are still out on the road, and we're doing it very, very safely. But we're doing what we do best, and that's getting in front of people. I mean, you remember the Democratic Party is always called everything between New York and California flyover states. They've always taken them for granted, and frankly, it's why we won so many of those states. It's why we won Michigan. It's why we won Wisconsin. It's why we did something that no one else, because people are sick and tired of being taken advantage of. I mean, you look at a state not too far from you, in Wisconsin, the Democratic convention was supposed to be on Milwaukee. They're not even showing up. They had so much disrespect for Wisconsin that no one from the DNC and the Bidens aren't even going there next week to accept the nomination. I mean, think about that fact. And so I'll be in Wisconsin next week, and I'll be all over, and I'm going to be in Michigan a lot during this whole process. And guess what? Biden's in his basement. He won't come out. He won't do a serious interview. Rick, if you asked Joe Biden to do an interview with you right now, he would say no. You couldn't get him on the show. He will not take a serious question. He will not take a pointed question. He can't get through a sentence without stumbling. Joe Biden is doing more interviews than he is. No one can find this guy. The questions that he is answering is from hometown reporters. They're pre-screened questions. I mean, it's incredible. And they're trying to convince him not to debate my father, which would be the first time in political history that presidential candidates didn't have a debate. And that's how I really think this campaign is shaping up. I mean, he's hiding, and there's only so long you can hide before you lose all credibility and frankly, disrespect a lot of people.
Well, in fairness, just a few weeks ago, we did have the former vice president on the show. Just as a point of clarity, he was here. Final question, let's talk about Michigan. Some reports out of McClatchy and others suggest that some of the spending that the Trump campaign had been doing here in the state has been scaled back. Does Michigan still play prominently as one of the states that makes up an electoral college victory for the Trump campaign?
We're gonna win Michigan, and we're gonna win a lot of other states. In fact, I think we're gonna pick up states that were never in contention before. Minnesota. I think we're gonna pick up Minnesota. You see, just the change of that state. We lost Minnesota by the smallest margin, and we didn't even think it was in contention. We're going to win Minnesota this time. I think we're going to win New Mexico this time. I think we're going to win New Hampshire this time. I mean, we're very close. I think we're within 8,000 votes in New Hampshire. We're going to win New Hampshire. We're expanding the map in ways, never seen before. And I think there's other states out there, frankly, that we could win. Colorado, there's a lot of ballot initiatives that went in 2016 that are no longer on the ballots in Colorado. I think, that could be a state that's in play. Nevada is a state that very much is in play that I think we could win. I think we're going to pick up a lot of states. We won 30 states last time. I think we're going to pick up states from that, and I think we're going to have a really great night on November 3rd. But Michigan has benefited tremendously. Ever since Bill Clinton signed NAFTA, you lost 70,000 factories in this country, most of which, or at least many of which were in Michigan. And you look at manufacturing jobs going back there, you look at the automotive industry and how well on a relative basis that's done. Michigan has been treated incredibly well based on my father's trade policies and other things. And I think we're going to have a really great victory there. And we love the people. We're honored that they voted for us the first time. And I'm confident we're going to do it again. I'm really confident, Rick, that we're going to do it again.
With just about 2.5 months to go before the election, polling since the beginning of July has shown Biden hovering in the high 40% range, occasionally breaking 50 in the Real Clear Politics average of polls, with Trump remaining in the low 40s. Democrats will hold their virtual convention beginning tomorrow. Republicans will complete their nomination process next week. When we come back, sending your kids back to school. There are a lot of questions and perhaps some new answers coming out of Lansing. That's next. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. This weekend in Lansing, lawmakers held a rare Saturday session in hopes of putting together a package of bills that would provide some clarity for school districts about, among other things, relaxing testing requirements and perhaps most important, how students will be counted if they're learning at home, not in the classroom. We talked with Senate Democratic leader Jim Ananich about that, but first we asked him to weigh in on the news that Kamala Harris would be the Democratic vice presidential nominee and putting together a state budget for this year and next. Senator, we start with the news that the presumptive Democratic nominee, former Vice President Joe Biden, has selected Kamala Harris as his running mate. Here in Michigan, we watched that perhaps with more interest than some because the Governor Gretchen Whitmer, had been talked about as a possible running mate. In fact, I talked with Mr. Biden about that very prospect a couple of weeks ago, and I asked him how important was Michigan, and is Governor Whitmer still in the running as a vice presidential candidate? And he said extremely, and yes. Was his short answer. So now we know who it's going to be. Give me your take on what that means for the ticket, the Democratic ticket, as your party heads into the convention next week.
Well, I think it shows the just great respect that Governor Whitmer has earned here in the state, but also nationally. I think she's more than happy being governor, and I think I'm going to work hard to make sure she's a governor for 6.5 more years, and I think she will be. About Kamala Harris, though, I think it's very exciting. I mean, she's a tremendous senator. Before that, an attorney general who did a great job for California, the second largest justice department in the country. And I think we want someone in both those individuals, both Vice President Biden and Senator Harris, be ready day one, because we have a lot of problems, and President Trump is going to leave us with a big mess on January 20th, and I couldn't think of two better people to clean that mess up.
Switching to issues back here, closer to home, there was a big budget deficit that developed for this fiscal year. Now, it wasn't the fault of any budgeting that the legislature had done, but in fact, it was a matter of revenues being restricted because of so many businesses being closed and the fact that the income tax collections had been deferred for a while. Republicans and Democrats in the legislature came together with some what I think are kind of unique solutions, using some federal money, using some of that rainy day fund, doing some of the things you had to do to backfill. How did that happen? Because it happened, normally when you see that kind of a deficit, or in my years covering the legislature, it usually becomes a big fight. In this case, there seemed to be a certain amount of unity.
Yeah, no question about it. I think in large part, it was a testament to the relationships we've built over the many years we've been working together. I think it's a testament to the governor's leadership. By all accounts, the governor still had the authority to spend the money unilaterally, but she wanted to come together and work with the legislature as is intended to do. And she, worked with our speaker and the majority leader and both minority leaders, along with the budget office and the probes chairs and vice chairs. And we just tried to cause as little harm as possible. And we were actually able to increase schools resources a little bit, increase a little bit to local governments, and basically do no harm. And hopefully this bodes well for our next budget, which will be due obviously October 1st. We're going to need help from the federal government. There's no question about that. Just the magnitude of the problem is not one that any state can handle on its own, and we're going to need help. And hopefully that they come together and pass the next level of CARES Acts.
Let's talk about that next budget, the fiscal 2021 budget. That's supposed to be in place by October 1st. And obviously, there had been consideration after last year's budget where there was some angst and some disagreement. And everybody said, okay, well, let's get this thing done early. Let's get it done by July 1st. Well, obviously, the pandemic came around, as I pointed out earlier, the lack of revenue, not knowing what the revenues are going to be. So now we're going to be moving into September before we get a budget. Now, we remember the days when we ran into September and sometimes into October, at least once, to try to get a budget done. Obviously, nobody wants that to happen now, but how certain, without more federal money, are you that you can get a budget done or even know how much money you're going to have?
I mean, we'll have a revenue estimating conference, which tells us sort of how bad the problem really is. And hopefully, as folks started to go back to work, that some of those numbers are better than they were in May. But if, either way, we have a constitutional requirement to get it done, and we've not missed it in my 10 years in Lansing. We won't miss it this year. If we don't get help from the federal government, it'll be devastating. We're asking all across the state, teachers and administrators and parents to trust us to send their kids back into the schools. We have a local control state, so that's what we do. We give guideposts for schools to determine how they want to open up safely, if they want to open up safely, if what process they're going to do. But if we don't have help from the federal government, it's going to be very difficult for us not to say, you're deciding to go back to school, and we're going to cut your school aid dollar. It's an impossible dilemma that we're going to create for schools if we do that. So the federal government, basically has to help, because that's just one area that we'll see cuts if it's as bad as it could be. We'll do our job and get it done, but then we'll be asking other people to do almost an impossible job, and I don't think that's leadership. So I hope that we can solve it. If we have to ourselves, figure out a way to do it. If we can't, hopefully the federal government will come in and this is a once in a lifetime. The last pandemic like this was 1918. This is the role of the federal government.
Well, given the magnitude of the problem, let's talk a little bit, without getting too far into the weeds, about what it really means. You talk about a $60 billion budget, and people say, well, there's a lot of money in there. We know a whole lot of that is restricted money. You can't do anything with it. And when you come down to it, you're dealing with two basic budgets. You're dealing with the general fund, general purpose dollars, and the school aid fund. And between those two, what do you guess the deficit could be for next year?
The earlier talks were in the 2 and 3 billions. There's just not money like that to make up, right? And there's just not enough. We've tightened the belt at the federal government, the state government, for a long time. There'll be a little bit here and there, maybe some one-time things we can do. We still have some money in the rainy day fund, but you don't want to deplete the whole. Even if we depleted the whole thing, it's not that much. So. If it's as bad as it could be in the billions, then we'll have to see dramatic cuts that I don't know if communities can absorb. And the amount of time we have is very limited. So we'll be putting together something that will be very tough to absorb. So, and I think, my wife's a teacher. I was a former teacher. I think throwing these teachers in classrooms with very little training on how to handle a pandemic, not the appropriate amount of sanitizing, we put resources available for PPE, but tell a kindergarten teacher not to walk up to a kindergartner that's crying. It's just not going to happen, right? So, we need to make sure we give them as much resources as possible, and giving them less right now is I can't even come up with the words. It's just you're putting educators and parents in just a lose-lose situation, and I don't think that's what we should be doing right now. They did nothing wrong, and they shouldn't be punished for it.
I hadn't really planned on talking about this with you, but given your background as a teacher, your wife's a teacher, and you have a young child, what is your take on this? Some schools are opening, some are deferring opening, some are giving alternatives to virtual learning. Is this just have to be a district by district choice?
I think so. I think because there's vast differences between Menominee and Monroe, right? They're just the amount of community spread, the amount of cases that we've seen, and we just, whether people like it or not, we're a local control state. So I think we meddle in education. The 10 years I've been there, I think we've meddled in education way too much, mandating ridiculous things that don't make any sense. But this is one of those times where I think we need to give resources. We need to give our state epidemiologists and our county by county epidemiologists should be giving guidance to their school superintendents and their school boards, saying, "Can you open up in a way that is successful for you?" And if that means in person or virtual or hybrid, I to think we've flattened the curve quite a bit, and it's continued to, it rose up, it popped up a little bit, and it's flattening again. I'm still very concerned about in-school education. I think I'm nervous for those kids. I'm nervous for the teachers. I'm also sympathetic to those parents that have to go back to work and they don't have an alternative for them. And when the majority's gutted the paid sick leave proposal, this is one of the reasons I didn't know there was going to be a pandemic, but parents shouldn't have to choose between sending a sick kid to school and going to work, especially during the middle of a pandemic, because if people aren't sure and they got to go to work and they have an unsympathetic boss and the state government, the federal government haven't done their job to make sure they have the resources to stay home during something like that, they're going to send their kid. I mean, and I'm not justifying it. I'm not saying it's right, but I just know human nature, right? You don't want to get fired if you're worried, and even though you're worried about your kid. I mean, people are they're going to be put in a bad situation like that, and that could spread throughout the school unbelievably quick. Because asking kids to socially distance and wear masks is important. We should do it, and if they do face to face, we should do the best we can. But I mean, you're not going to see teachers grabbing kids and pushing them apart. That's just not what they do, and they shouldn't do that. So I'm really nervous about this fall. I mean, I think the past 5 months, instead of suing the governor, instead of starting a petition drive to take away power, we should have been empowering school districts with the resources to make sure that they can make this choice in a way that's not lose-lose. But with the timing coming up, I'm very concerned. I hope these districts have, on their own, done what they should have done, because my colleagues in the legislature failed them the last 5 months. And this is one area where I don't talk like this normally, but we had an opportunity to make sure that schools in particular, because we're taking care of young children and high schoolers and kids getting around to move on to the part of their life, and we had an opportunity to do better, and we didn't.
As this airs on Sunday morning, you will have been in session on Saturday dealing with some of the issues surrounding schools, including perhaps how count days will be done and how you're going to deal with funding and all of those kind of things. Tell me about this Saturday session that will have happened by the time this airs, but as you and I talk, has not yet.
Yeah, I think it'll have passed the Senate and it will be on the way to the House. But I think one of the things that people in watching need to understand is we're not answering the question for you or for your school board or for you as a parent, whether your kid's going virtual, hybrid, or in person. That's not what we're doing. So if you're looking for that to be the answer, you're going to be disappointed. And you have a right to be, right? I'm not suggesting that's what we should be doing, but we should have given you more clarity before this. What we're going to tell you is, if your kid is in school, whether it's in virtual, hybrid, or in the classroom, we're going to be flexible on the amount of tests we make them take. We're going to give some better clarity on the way we count pupils. We're going to use a largely off of last year's numbers and some on this year's numbers, but much more than normally we do. We're kind of flipping the percentage around because we don't want to punish people if they decide to stay home, or we don't want to punish schools because they need to have the resources. So what we're really doing is looking at the requirements that we put on schools and kind of giving some ease to those for this calendar year. So that's the scope of what we're doing. So I think if people are looking for something else or looking to be told they're going to be virtual, that's not what we're doing. And I think that's important to make sure I note, because I think a lot of folks are anticipating this day to be bigger than it is. It's important because schools can't operate if they don't know what requirements are going to be put on them. And I think we're doing a good job of loosening those in a pandemic, but we're not doing more than that. And I think that's important to note.
As for that state budget, Senator Ananich pointed out something that we've been talking about for weeks now. And that is, if another round of stimulus is not forthcoming from the federal government, putting together a budget here in the state will become much more difficult. With no deal in sight in Washington, the budget deadline in just about 45 days looms large. We'll be back with a final thought next. To the point. So the national political conventions will be held over the next 2 weeks. They'll be anything but usual, not like the crowds when I traveled to Cleveland and Philadelphia 4 years ago. Instead, a virtual hookup to try and fire up the base. We'll have coverage all week long. See you here next Sunday morning. To the point.